Sound check one, Mayor's Task Force, sound check one.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our meeting this morning for the City of Hamilton's Mayor's Task Force on Transparency, Access, and Accountability. I'd like to call our meeting to order and welcome everybody. Thanks, as always, to our task force members, city staff, and partners from SPRC Hamilton Enterprise who have joined us for today's meeting. Madam Clerk, could you please confirm that quorum is present?
Quorum is present, Co-Chair.
Thank you. And in opening, I'd like to start with our land acknowledgement, which acknowledges that the City of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the District 1 Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabeg to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between Lakes Purchase of 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And we keep these obligations, treaties, and perspectives in mind as we are going through our work as a task force, and especially considering the themes that we are focused on. Moving on to our approval agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, we have a few changes to today's agenda, Chair. They are that the delegation request from Brian McHattie respecting the identification of transparency issues with the city's land use planning process has been withdrawn. And the documentation under 9.2, Mayor's Task Force on Transparency, Access, and Accountability Project Work Plan Review, and 9.3, which is the focus group approach review, have been included in the agenda.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So I will ask for a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as amended. Madeline, second by Tinashe. All in favor? Okay, motion approved. Declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest to note? Okay, seeing none, no declarations of interest to note. We'll move on to the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting, which have been distributed. So our task force meeting on August 14th, 2024. I will ask for a mover and then a seconder to put the minutes on the floor. Tinashe and Madeline, any questions, comments, items to note from our previous meeting minutes? Okay, seeing none, we'll ask for a motion for approval. Okay. Or sorry, I will ask if we are all in favor. Yes, we are. Thank you. Motion carried. Okay, moving on to today's business, our discussion items. So we have had a lot of progress in terms of our task force activities and agenda over the past little while. So we have three kind of points in the discussion items, which I'll just note now because they might blend a little bit. We have a progress review of everything that's been done and where the project is at this point. We'll also have a review of our work plan, which has been shared as our meeting materials in terms of looking forward and what's coming up in the near future and through the duration of the project. And as well, we have a specific approach to discuss today in regard to our focus groups. And we also, I believe, yes, we did circulate as well the draft survey questions, so an opportunity to dig into them. They were previously circulated and now we have them in a more refined format. So we are moving very close towards launching everything out into market, so to speak. So I'll have an opportunity to go through all these items today. So why don't we start off with the progress review? And I think, Jesse, I'll turn it over to you to kind of lead the conversation, and with Ted, and we will layer in.
Excellent, thank you. Nice to see everybody again. Jesse from Enterprise Canada. Just to give a kind of a status update and sort of what's transpired over the last month coming out of our last public meeting and all the work that has been done to get us to where we are today, which is nearing that cliff ledge of being able to open up all of our consultations and start engaging with citizens and community or residents and community members. So coming out of our last task force meeting, we had a really robust conversation and around the survey questions, our approach to how we're engaging residents, whether or not we wanted to use the Engage Hamilton platform, and sort of how we sort of saw the steps going forward. As well as some helpful direction and some helpful information that has been passed on from the city in terms of past consultative efforts across a variety of different channels, whether it's our city surveys or specific engagements, breaking down different or focus on different community groups, which really all sort of touched in and around a similar space to what we are trying to engage to and trying to come up with recommendations recommendations. So coming out of that meeting, we took a very, let's say a hard turn in terms of utilizing all this new information and really getting to a place that our consultative efforts were really focused on outcomes and really focused on what improvements and recommendations could be made, and had less on trying to identify the problems and less in trying to identify where the frustration points are. And the reason for that being the city has done I would say a really good job over the years of collecting that information in terms of where residents are frustrated, what they kind of, how they're feeling on the periphery about different, city services, city functions. So we really were in a position to utilize all of that data as, it was collected over the last 2-3 years, so relatively recent, and we can position that data to sort of, let's say, prime the folks that we're engaging with so that they understand, we've heard you, we know what the issue is, now let's get into the nitty-gritty about where we need to see improvements. So coming from that meeting, we did kind of revise timelines a little bit, which we'll get to in the work back schedule regarding, we slightly have pushed back the consultations for the wider community members and some of the focus groups, and really putting an emphasis here on outcomes-based consultation. And what I mean by that is getting to a part, if we're thinking of the perfect end goal here in terms of what does our report look like and what, from our conversations together, what is the great end goal? The end goal here is a list of recommendations to council that are more specific, that improve communication and improve accessibility, and also have some level of focus testing and some level of engagements with citizens that citizens can, or residents can, in community groups and outside stakeholders can say, hey, actually, out of these 10 different things that we've heard throughout the engagements, here are 3 of them that we actually feel would change perceptions or would be a larger impact if council were to move forward with it. So it really gets us into a great place where, I think from the goals of the task force and the mandate of the task force, we can get to a place where there is clear, specific recommendations that both us, both the task force as well as city council, the mayor's office, we're all sort of accountable to because they are specific and because they are tangible. So from that, over the course of the last month, we have taken an overhaul of the survey questions to reposition the approach to the surveys. We have come up with an approach that we think will work really well based on the outcomes and the tangible changes for focus groups that I know we'll discuss a little bit later today. We've had the ability to go through volumes and volumes of city data in terms of past consultations and different areas to see what we can bring into the consultations in terms of, hey, actually in these 3 or 4 what we heard reports, there's 2 ideas here and an idea here that residents have actually come forward with that now we can bring together and sort of layer into this consultative effort. So I would say all in all, the delay was quite worth it in terms of we were able to sort of skip ahead and sort of really utilize the work that was done by the city in the past over the last few years and focus in on those next steps. Outside of that, there's also a lot of work done in the background just in terms of preparing all of our discussion guides and questions for all the different target audiences that we are that we're going to discuss about today, so that really we're in a place, really within the next week or so that we can see a lot of, flip the switch, as you will, and really start getting things scheduled and getting things live. And that's including work with the City of Hamilton to get the Engage Hamilton platform kind of lined up and utilized as a great kind of one-stop shop for residents to learn about all the different pathways and engagements that we're going to be taking over the course of the next month and a bit. And my last note I'm going to say on this is just to reassure everybody that despite the pushback in time in terms of some of these public engagements, we are still widely confident that with our efforts, we're going to be able to turn around the report in the exact same amount of time by the end of the year. So looking forward to meeting those deadlines and having a really strong concrete report at the end of this process.
Excellent. Thanks, Jesse. It's an impressive amount to get out in one breath, so well done. Ted, is there anything you want to layer in from SPRC? Okay.
I think Jesse's pretty well covered it all. We've had lots of conversations and calls, and we're meeting regularly with the enterprise team as well and the SPRC team just to go over all the different pieces moving forward. And so I think it's been an excellent working relationship so far, and we're feeling very confident in terms of where this project is going.
Awesome. Good to hear that. Thank you, Ted. And to my colleagues, any questions, comments on our progress to date or our slight pivot there, Joanne?
Okay. First of all, thank you for that, Jesse. You know, with our first planning meeting, we covered so much ground, and the fact that it's such a short time frame, we're getting stuff back was just amazing. So thank you for that. I love this way we're moving forward because it's a stronger ask when we're asking people, because we're starting with the football already down the road. They've already answered these questions, and secondarily, it also shows we're listening in the first time. You know what I mean? And we're utilizing what they're telling us. It's a stronger kind of ask when we get into there. And last but not least, there was one other thing I wanted to ask. Yes, in some of the preambles that are going to be going out, we keep saying residents, and I know I mentioned this before, but I've asked people who work in different municipalities, what does a resident mean? And people always say, it's just the people, it's not local businesses. So that's kind of the public perception. So I was wondering, when we say residents, can we attach it with and local businesses, just so the people reading it know it's everyone in our community, not just the perception it's just single families or, you know, people who just live here and don't have business. So anyway, I just thought I'd put that out there. That's all, but I thought, great job.
Thank you, and appreciate the kind words. 100%. I think in all the preambles, I would say they're all sort of in a draft form now, especially given that there's going to be so many different ways to engage with this process over the next month. So there might be some, specific ones that we want to leave the language just solely as residents because it is more general public and more resident focused. That said, I think in any corresponding, news release, any sort of publications that we're going out about the project as a whole, specifically when we're talking about the different focus groups and in a lot of the other avenues, 100%. I think that's an easy and worthwhile change to make to ensure that it's reflective of the fact that even all the past consultations weren't just residents. It was residents, it was stakeholders, it was different institutional partners in the city, and we'll be chatting with all of them over the course of the next, opening up an ability to chat with them over the course of the next month and a half.
Excellent. Thanks, Joanne. And yeah, maybe we'll take a look and as we finalize things, use the language like organization, just to refer broadly to the notion that there's individual people and as well as entities that have an interest. So I appreciate that. So thank you for all the updates. And yeah, I'll just agree with Joanne's perspective. Realistically, we are going to do for this kind of round of activity, one set of outreach to everybody. So, these things push us back just a little bit, but I think the utility of them and taking up everybody's time to talk to them, if it's more efficient and more useful, then it is worth doing. So appreciate that from everybody. So with that being said, we do have this substantial set of activities in front of us. I think, Jesse, again, maybe you can help us kind of lead the conversation, and we'll go a little bit paced. We don't have to hit all of the points, but just to walk through what we're looking at over the next little while in terms of our project work plan, kind of make sure that we're all on the same page, make sure that we all understand what we're going to do and where different people may be active within the process.
Excellent. I'll keep this at a really high level, just knowing that everyone has the document in front of them, and I'll sort of walk through thematically what sort of the next steps are, and then can answer any specific questions. I think really what we're looking at here in terms of timeline and a work back and sort of what's coming ahead is that we would from a consultation kickoff, provided everything from the work plan and all the documents we're looking at today are I don't want to say approved, but we're all comfortable and confident in the language. We would want to see the sort of announcement of the consultations kicking off go live within the coming days, if not coming week, just to ensure that we can be public and draw folks' attention to the consultation materials and what's taking place. we're taking a slightly different approach in sort of the rollout of the consultation compared to what it was last time, in which in the first iteration of our work back plan, it was really focused on opening up every line of consultation at the exact same time. Because we're taking a bit of a nuanced approach here to really focus on outcomes and really focus on those recommendations, we've actually staggered the consultations slightly. And what I mean by that is, let's say, and this isn't the actual date, but let's say today or tomorrow this press release goes live and we announce to the public and organizations and partners that we're in a position to open up the consultation. There would be a way from that moment for any resident or anybody in the city of Hamilton to respond to to send an email or put up their hand and provide their thoughts to the task force right out of the gate. But what would happen is over the course of the next couple of weeks, we would put a lot of effort and a lot of emphasis on engaging with the mayor's office, with city council, with SLT, and with city staff to have conversations. And we understand scheduling. It's not realistic that we're going to have all of these conversations between now and October 1st, but we want to try to get a handful of these conversations in to have more focused conversations with these individuals on outcomes, on do they have ideas, are there things they are hearing from citizens, and are there other pieces that we can actually kind of factor in and bring into the public consultation and bring into the focus groups to again test and get some feedback from the community on these potential solutions to improving trust, accountability, and access. So from that, once that green light happens, the press release would go out. There is an opportunity for residents to respond. We would begin aggressively going after scheduling to set up these conversations with the city and with city council, as well as start building out sort of our lists for the focus groups that we'll talk to in a little bit more depth in the next agenda item. Ideally, how we see it is basically the month of September really focused on that SLT and city council engagement, and then October is primarily, we'll still be engaging with council and SLT at that time, assumedly, but that is when we would really focus and shift our attention to engaging with community members, with stakeholders, with businesses, with SPRC's work with the underrepresented or equity deserving groups to really start focus testing those ideas, still collecting new ideas at the same time, but really having those concrete, more public facing engagements to develop the final report in terms of what our recommendations would be. So all that to say, September focused internally and focused on kind of getting what last we can added in terms of additional survey questions or additional solutions that can be consulted on. Spending October going through those consultations with community and institutional partners, with residents, and those who live and work in the city. And then in November, I would say early November is probably bat and cleanup, to steal a sports reference a little bit in terms of making sure that we've engaged with or have opened up engagements with all the right community members, and that we're confident that we have robust enough responses to kind of conclude the final report. And then throughout November, just really finalizing that report, those executive summaries, so that come December at a GIC or a future meeting, we can be in a position to ensure that it's the report's been delivered and we can wrap up our engagements on time.
Excellent. Thank you, Jesse, and covered a lot of ground there again. I'll turn it over to my colleagues for any questions, comments on the plan in front of us. Okay. So just a few things I had of note from my side. So again, we're out there within a week. Not that, to your point, not that everything's open within a week. It might be slightly after that the survey, for example, opens, but everybody will know what's coming. Again, there is that opportunity for media engagement. Specifically, we'll make note of that as well. The dates we're inviting, encouraging delegations, which I think we've noted as October 16th and 22nd. So looking forward to hearing from some people in person on those dates. And then in general, just with the significant amount of meetings, whether the one-on-one meetings or the focus group meetings that task force members will be anticipating kind of splitting up, with the enterprise or SPRC to various of us sitting into the various different meetings in terms of our work and engagement on that front. And then, I think the overall schedule provided us is tight and efficient, but doable if we stay on track with everything. So thank you for that. Joanne?
I think also, too, we can't think of everything, so there may be some of the delegations where someone does feel left out, and we have to do something special at that point. Our community, we'd be more than happy to accommodate that, either a one-on-one consultation, whatever. So we can't put everything in here because we don't know what's happening, but we certainly will try to appease everyone who wants to actually come and tell us what they want to tell us.
Absolutely, and maybe just to that point as well, I think some of the great conversations that we're having with the city and their team in terms of setting up the Engage Hamilton platform, really looking at ways to kind of provide that catch-all so that even if there's folks that don't necessarily want to engage in a survey format, that there's still plenty of avenues for them to direct their feedback and direct their comments into the city.
Excellent. So thank you, everybody. So I think we are looking forward to a lot of activity, but on the same page in terms of what we'll be doing and when we'll be doing it. So I think we'll layer into some of the framing and content within those. So we have 2 documents in that regard that have been circulated. One was the draft survey questions, and the other one was the approach to focus groups. I would look at maybe a couple of the activities in 2 buckets. If we look at, say, the delegations or the surveys, it's, let's say, more oriented towards individuals, hearing what people think. Maybe written submissions a little bit more in that regard too. And then with our focus groups, we're more so maybe looking to group more organizations or institutional partners and hear what they think as a group. So that's, I think, also part of what we'll see in some of how the documents are maybe related or cohesive, but framed slightly differently. So I think maybe what we can do is start off the conversation around the survey questions, which were discussed and circulated prior and have since been updated in alignment as well with the kind of reframing that Jesse referred to, which said, let's get some of the facts that are already known on the table first to get right to some of the solution conversation rather than hearing again some of the things that people may be frustrated by. So Jesse, I do think we'll spend a little bit of time hearing people's feedback or perspective on the updated set of questions. And I do note that there's been a lot of feedback that was taken from the prior meeting in terms of streamlining language, things like that. But maybe you can start us off just reiterating, and we have this kind of past polling part, how we might be approaching layering in this new perspective with some of the previous information.
Of course. So I think one thing that we came out of that last meeting and what we really want to kind of accomplish here with this survey is sort of level setting with residents and also and with community members right outside of the gate, that this is really building on past work and really building on past consultations and past things that we've heard from the community. So rather than, asking residents again why they're, if they feel frustrated or if they think there are service delays or anything to that effect, really kind of leveraging some of the past data points to level set with community members, right, or survey takers, right out of the gate of this is the framing of the conversation. We've included in this a litany of different data points that we found that we think are the most relevant or the most pertinent. We can probably whittle this down to maybe 3 or 4 more, 3 or 4 specific points that we can use to sort of level set the conversation. But the idea here would be to, would be to show those that are taking the survey and show those that are about to engage the basis that we want them to, the starting point of the consultation and the starting point of how we want them to go through the survey questions and respond. So for instance, we understand that residents feel like they're left out of the decision-making process. We understand that residents are, specifically frustrated and or happy with these types of city services. We specifically feel that residents don't hear much or don't know much about different consultations or different engagements or decisions that the city is making. So within the context of these points, within the context of this frustration and the context of these answers, please engage with and respond to these questions throughout this survey to help us come up with solutions. And the one thing I want to note is slightly off there is, there are some, we tried to cut down the survey as much as possible. There's probably going to be some questions at first glance that everyone might look at as, oh, maybe we can omit this, or maybe, you know, to really strengthen this, maybe we can remove it. The reason that we didn't, and the reason that there are still some overlap or some additional questions that touch on similar spaces, is to really inform the final recommendations and the final points that are coming out. So for instance, it's while we understand where there's some frustration in terms of different city departments or how people interact with the city, and that consultation data exists already, what we want to be able to do is through the engagement data that comes back, let's say if you know, I'll just use this as an example. Let's say if it comes to bylaw complaints or bylaw complaints or you know, potholes or anything in that matter. You know, these are specific things that people are often reaching out to the city or often complaining about. And then as they are going through the survey questions, you know, there's a strong correlation between people who are calling about bylaw and calling about specific infrastructure complaints and those that want to see a real-time dashboard. That allows us in the recommendation and at the end to go, when you're thinking about solutions, it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. It's not going to be a dashboard that can cover every city service, but hey, there is a strong correlation between those that are frustrated with infrastructure problems in the city and those that want to be able to see the city's heard my, you know, the city's received my complaint. The complaint has gone to the respective person inside the city. It's now been assigned to a team that's gonna go and fix it. Or, you know, let's say there's a corresponding communications point. You know, everyone's complaining. You know, I'll pick on, you know, some of the worst offenders. You know, Barton Street in terms of potholes or you know, different bridges and things like that. Where this isn't a quick fix. This isn't something the city's going to be able to tackle overnight. It's probably a part of a long-term infrastructure plan. But hey, communication is a second piece. So now we know and we have a way to identify that when it comes to lagging, you know, infrastructure needs across the city, it really is being a lot more forward with communication and timelines about these things need to be improved and when. So I just wanted to share that in terms of a little bit of a color and why there is some additional questions that have sort of been asked before, and it's really just to inform specific recommendations. So the recommendation goes a bit further than, hey, do X. It's no, hey, do X, and it's, you know, we've noticed that it's largely tied to these three areas or these three frustrations in the city.
Excellent. Thanks, Jesse. And just to clarify with the document we have in front of us, so the questions that are posed here are potentially very close to the final questions we may choose to use. The first page or the first part there are elements that would kind of go into the preamble or framing that are not quite finalized yet. There would probably be a little more sync kind of framing that layers in some of these concepts so people are in the state of mind, and then the survey questions are subject to finalization but potentially pretty close, right? Is that, yeah. So yeah, I will open the floor, yeah.
Sorry. I was wondering if, before these are finalized, if we could run them through our public engagement team and also through an evaluation lens. We do have an internal evaluator that we often run these through so that we can ensure that these questions are getting the data that you actually want. There's some that look like they could have more than one answer, and that's why it's really good to put that lens on it as well as the language, just to simplify and make sure that they're very easy to understand and that you're getting that exact data for the exact question you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. We could probably do that right away with this set, yeah. Perfect. Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much. I was just, I had one overarching question and then one specific question related to, or some discussion about question number 10. At our last meeting, we had talked about collecting demographic data alongside the survey, and it's not on this document, so I just was wondering about an update about where that would fit in.
Of course. So just on that part, buried down on a slightly separate page is question 18. Question 18, 19, and 20, which is on those demographic points. Our our thought here and our sort of vision here is that there would be demographic questions at the end that are strictly optional for folks to respond to if they are comfortable responding to them. The reason why they are kind of put down as the below optional questions is we're also just working out through the process of engaging with the Engage Hamilton team and the city's consultative team, some of this that's collected already through folks that have registration accounts. But largely we still want to try to collect that consultative data or that demographic data, sorry, just in a way that is completely optional and completely hands-off so that people don't feel like we're, invading their privacy or collecting too much information. But again, want to include some of this to better understand again, the correlation between what community groups or what demographic groups want to see what changes so that we can understand if there's particular city services or particular areas in the city that their feedback or their comments are maybe a little bit more relevant to.
I see it now. Thank you so much for that. I think I saw the big gap after question 17 and didn't scroll down further. So I think kind of to the point earlier about running this by city staff, I think that would be helpful to see how it fits into the framework with other city surveys. As it stands now, we're erring on the side of trying to ask not very many questions, but maybe might not get the granularity that we might want because we're basically that question D is kind of a catch-all of folks who may be from various equity-deserving backgrounds. So personally, I would have been leaning toward collecting something a little bit more comprehensive, but happy to follow the lead of the group. I don't know if we want any more discussion on that point, and then I just wanted to have a look together at question number 10.
No, of course. And on that one, I think it's we can honestly be as granular as we need to be. The reason why we have it worded that way now is a little bit more focused in terms of the focus groups and some of the additional engagements where that's a way for us to sort of take folks that are engaging with the survey and then introducing them to other consultative elements. But I think our recommendation or where my mind ends up here is that we just align the demographic questions to what the city's regular process is and what the city regularly asks. And I think having that perfectly in line, whether that's more or less or the same, is probably the right approach that we should take from this survey perspective.
Sounds good. Shall I just do the number 10 and then,
Yeah.
or is it on that topic, Tanashi? This is more like wording and question structure to the points earlier. So question number 10, I was just looking at and thinking that we should probably have an other option because although the options listed look quite comprehensive, I imagine there may be categories of information that aren't captured in those 5. And I was just going to suggest something along the lines for option C, changing that from daily operational services to something like city services or city services and programs, just for our consideration. Thank you so much.
Nope, that's a great point. And actually, my comment or ask back to the group would be perhaps we actually break that out into 2, and one of them is city services and one of them is city programs. Even if we have to provide an EG or an example at the end of just what we're talking about, that might actually be helpful. Helpful from a data collection perspective about whether or not the complaints are focused on street clearing or whether or not it's the neighborhood rec center and what time a kid can go swim. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks both. Tanashi?
Yeah, thank you so much for taking in all the feedback. I know last meeting we all had like a lot of things to add to your plate. The only thing I guess I was wondering is at the top of this survey, I appreciate the framing where you've almost listened in past surveys. So I think residents would appreciate that it's a continuation of engagement. But like one of the things that would be nice would be have some aspirational, I guess to set the tone for the residents, some blurb about where we're hoping this goes so that people enter the survey with a solution focused and that type of attitude. Just a tiny little blurb, nice little thing there at the top.
Absolutely, and there is an iteration of the general statement that I think exists that we need to go back and we need to refine, but 100%. There's actually a number of these different pieces that as we work with the city and work on going through some of the city processes, there's a lot of great questions and a lot of great components of the Engage Hamilton platform that we haven't yet discussed in terms of, who's listening and who's evaluating and listening into the report, that I think allows us to refine and really focus in on that solution process. Or it's not the solution process, sorry, the tone and the setting of the tone of the survey. So 100%, I think we'll have something sort of at the top that, in my mind, it's you probably are going to engage in the survey. You're probably immediately getting that aspirational, short few sentences of this is what we're trying to accomplish. And then from what we're trying to accomplish, okay, now here's the level set. This is what we've heard already. And then here are the questions to help us inform what these final recommendations will be.
Yeah, just layer in. That's a great reminder, Tashi, because I think we could probably layer that into almost everything we're communicating about, which is we're doing this, we're going to bring recommendations to council and the city corporation, but really it's, residents and organizations are just also all contributing to the improvement of trust and transparency between all of us, right? So it is a leadership opportunity even for those who are filling out the survey or doing anything. So I think it's a good reminder for us as we do our comms review. So thank you for that. You had a few hands, yep.
Okay, so I just wanted to share a little bit about Engage Hamilton. It will be a page. So on that page, when you go, so it's engage.hamilton.ca, we will have a project page for this whole project. It will give that context, that information. That's a great spot to have that inspirational messaging that we can also run through comps, make sure it's very, very tight. And there'll also be a timeline so people can see, okay, this is the first iteration we're doing the online surveys. If there's an opportunity to have a delegation, we can add that there. So it's like that one-stop shop. You can see all of these opportunities where it's now moving to a community partner focus, then when the results are going to be reported back, and then when it's going back to council. So it gives those sort of timeline, a little bit of more features. And then for some of these survey questions as well, Jesse and I were chatting the other day, there's an opportunity where we can use some other tools in addition to the survey feature. Not everybody loves doing a survey, and especially if it seems kind of long. There's also a forum where people can provide those open-ended comments. There's a polls feature. There are the virtual sticky notes where people can share ideas. So you can collect data in multiple ways using the same elements that you have right here. Thanks.
Thank you for that. And Jen, go ahead.
Me? Nancy, that was wonderful. I think if we have this aspirational statement in front of everything we're doing, it's also going to keep us focused. So I was going to ask you the question of your engagement team, do they already have an aspirational focus? Because what we're going to try to do is whatever the city's feeling and thinking, we're trying to pull them both together inward. So if you have one, it'd be nice to know.
Yes, we do, and we'd like to align that with the city's recently endorsed public engagement policy that was in January of this year. We want to do meaningful public engagement, and I think that this really connects strongly, and we want to build relationships with community. And when we build our relationships with community and we collect meaningful feedback that then informs decisions, then we're building trust and confidence in our city.
That was a great pitch.
Wow.
Put a video. Good. Okay, so excellent. And to that point, actually, we've been doing a lot of the survey design via, writing it down in a document, but that, the document isn't the form that people will experience it. So I think at this point, we might even be able to start moving towards putting it onto a draft version on the platform. And then we can evaluate it not just with any final tweaks to the wording, but from the lens of the experience that the people are having, and then we can potentially layer in some of those ideas. So again, a lot of moving fast elements, but we're not launching the survey immediately with the update, so maybe we can have that happening in parallel. Excellent. So thank you everyone for the discussion. Any final thoughts, comments on the survey in particular? Yep.
Yeah, this is a relatively minor quibble, but there's a couple of questions that have neutral responses, and I think generally avoiding neutral response bias is a good practice. Just a few of them there. That was all I had to say.
Perfect. We can go through and we can we will scrub for that, because 100% I think that is a very valid point that I think was just missed in our overhaul of the original survey questions.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, everyone. So I think just to close off the survey part, we've really honed in from wide aperture of a lot of elements and thoughts to pretty close to what the survey final questions might be. We're going to refine the framing, make sure it's aspirational and in line with the city's aspirational framing, potentially shoot a video and put that up there. And but we'll get it onto the website so we can see it in that format and have it up in the near future so people can look forward to it. So really good conversation on the survey. Thank you for that. And we are moving into our kind of main last discussion point for today, which is in regard to the outline for the focus groups. So another key element or dynamic of interaction with our constituents. So again, maybe Jesse, you'll set us up and we'll continue the conversation from there.
Perfect. And maybe what I'll do for this one is I'll touch on some of the enterprise-led focus groups, and then we'll hand it over to Ted to speak to the SPRC ones. So I want to take a moment here to explain this document and explain some of the buckets and the framing or the process of what went into these suggestions, because I do realize that some of the headings here could be a little bit jarring in terms of what we're setting ourselves up for in terms of conversations with community partners and organizations. So what really went into this document was trying to think through the robust engagements that we have had and that the city has had over the years with all of these different institutional partners and stakeholder groups, what our goals are and what our mandate is in terms of coming to recommendations on those three central themes, and how we could tailor this for a focus group to really come to some concrete recommendations. So what we have done is we are proposing from the enterprise perspective, we are proposing 7 different focus groups that we would take place over the course of likely October. The focus groups are based on different themes, and I'm gonna pick on a couple of them here just to sort of explain the rationale and explain the thought process. But really, what we wanted to do was we wanted to take a step away from, I will say, general issues that might be taking place in the city in terms of housing and homelessness or affordability or some of those larger themes that I think the city has heard a lot on in terms of resident feedback or institutional partner feedback or community group feedback in terms of frustrations, opportunities, paths forwards, and solutions, but really organize the conversations in and around how folks interact with the city. So that, again, sort of similar to how it was structured in the survey questions in terms of having some identifiers to understand where the feedback is tied to specific city operations, organizing our focus groups in a way that is very similar or kind of strikes at the core of that premise. So when talking about social services and community support, the focus group and the questions and the framing of these conversations isn't necessarily to open robust conversations in terms of how do you think the city is doing when it comes to social services or when it comes to providing supports to community members. It's really to understand from those community partners and organizations that interact with the city frequently and then perhaps deliver services or more of the public-facing components of those, or they're more public-facing than the city is in some of these areas, to really understand where they see opportunities for improvement, where they see opportunities to have those organizations feel that they have, more trust or more transparency in their interactions with the city. So I think there are sort of two streams here in terms of how the city, how the city sort of has to, I don't want to say handle expectations, but has to respond to feedback on transparency, access, and accountability. One of them is directly what the city is doing, what the city is front-facing on, and how the city, interacting with permits or individuals going to rec centers and seeing community programming. The flip side of this is, residents that are, or individuals in the city that are frustrated and don't understand how the city's policies how the city's policies impact them when it's not directly it's not directly the city that's communicating with them. So if they're interacting with community partners, it's how do you restore that trust and how do you restore that working relationship with the community partners so that they have the right information, they have the right data, they feel like they're in the right space, so that when it comes time for those community partners to work with their residents and their stakeholder groups, you're sort of connecting a chain here in terms of other ways that residents get frustrated or feel that there's not transparency, and improve that holistically across the entire system. So it's really to focus on those again, tangible improvements, tangible recommendations to how all of these different groups, whether we're talking about social and community services and talking about, access or barriers to communities to engage with the city, whether we're talking about business and economic development when it comes to economic development or public-private partnerships, really just looking at it across the breadth of city services and city operations to understand from that intermediary perspective where their frustrations are, where they see room for improvement, so that this covers the entire gambit of city public facing, and then also things that maybe the city is wearing frustrations on, but there is an additional step where the message is getting, the message or the decisions are getting muddied. So now we understand that there's a better process that needs to take place here. Again, there are the 7, and we can sort of discuss this more holistically, and I can answer questions on why the 7, or if any of these need to change, or the groups that we need to change in each of these. Just before I hand it off to Ted, as we sort of see a next step here is once we've approved thematically these focus groups, our next step would be to actually start working on the specific invite lists and outreach lists to reach out and to populate these focus groups. We're not necessarily suggesting a list today in terms of who we're going to talk about, but we want to ensure that we have the themes, can make sure that we're public about what themes we're going to be engaging on, so that we can create our internal lists of who we're going to reach out to, but then also this allows the community and other organizations to sort of see themselves in one of the buckets and see an opportunity for them to engage as well. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ted to talk about the SPRC focus groups before answering questions.
Sure. So in terms of the SPRC-led focus groups, in terms of equity deserving groups, and so really focusing on some of the questions that were coming up in the during the survey question section, we definitely, you will see that we've parsed out the Indigenous communities, and so we're looking at not just leadership, but also, members of the Indigenous community, but working with leadership to do that focus group, see what that looks like, and really engage again that the Indigenous communities in Hamilton to explore those, some of the same kinds of themes that Jesse was just talking about. And we've already started to build a list. You see some organizations here, but there's others that we know are in the city, and so this is definitely not, this is just a starting place. And then for the other two, or we had a discussion of maybe 3, depending again on what the uptake is like, but we're looking to have several for equity deserving community members, again, focusing not just on the leaders of organizations that serve, but also actual residents, actual stakeholders, community members of equity deserving groups throughout the city, and doing this through both virtual and in person, because we know that sometimes the in-person can be a challenge. We've got, over a month, of October to do these, and scheduling and trying to find the spaces. We're also starting to think about spaces where we might hold the in-person meeting, looking at a couple of options there, and definitely are starting to build out the list of organizations that we would approach to reach out to. I think that's about it from the SPRC, but definitely working diligently to get those going. Hopefully mid-October is what we're aiming for at this point.
Excellent, thank you both. So I'll open up the floor, and maybe I'll suggest we can frame any responses or perspective in 2 ways. One is just the overall logic to this project, and then after that, maybe we can talk a little bit about if there's any comments or feedback on the specifics vis-a-vis the actual suggested groups. So maybe I'll open the floor first, just the approach and generally how we're going about it. If anyone has any questions, comments, thoughts.
I'm not sure whether this falls into your categories, but I'll ask my question. I didn't quite understand how to position that, but so thank you for breaking this down this way. It makes it easy to understand your approach. And my question was more thinking about I guess someone who, as a resident who does not fit into, let's say, the equity-seeking groups, I'm not really seeing the space for them in here. So this is, I don't know, like this morning we were talking about parents, and this morning the city has their website on for registration. Maybe I'm missing it within your framing, but someone who might not necessarily fall into the I guess, equity deserving groups, but is a resident nonetheless. How are they, or are they part of this focus group process, or are they just answering the survey?
That's a fantastic question. I would say largely I think the tool here, the mechanism of these focus groups is really focused on and set up not necessarily it's set up in a strategic way to fill in the gaps of what the delegation and what the survey questions cannot capture, or what they will capture. So just in trying to think about ensuring that there is, equal opportunity, and ensuring that there is spaces to get community feedback and community voices from across the different perspectives and channels, we necessarily haven't baked in like a general public focus group in this approach, just because we know that there are the delegation opportunities. There is going to be a city survey opportunity in which these voices, in which these pieces come forward. I would say there's probably two buckets that we can think about the focus group lists and why we've taken this approach for these different groups. Is from the enterprise-led perspective, this is really focused not on general public. It is really focused on institutional partners, community organizations, advocacy groups, folks that are, they're attached to organizations that work with the city and will have a very specific and different viewpoint. And then from the SPRC perspective and the equity deserving group perspective, it's, here are groups and individuals that likely or are unlikely to participate in all the other channels, that need that sort of extra amount of effort, where, I don't want to presuppose how many folks will be in each of the focus groups, but even if there is, 50 individuals that, from the equity deserving lens that participate in those focus groups, we're still probably going to find ourselves in the world in which there are, hundreds of responses from general public citizens throughout all of the other channels, which really sort of just kind of highlights the need of why we only focused on equity deserving and community stakeholders through the focus group approach, and not also opening up another opportunity for those to come and share their perspectives in that particular format.
Okay, so I think the SPRC's approach might be an approach you might use for your enterprise-led. So if you are engaging a social service agency or whatever stakeholder group, might there be a way that it's not just a bunch of executives coming in and maybe nudging them to engage a member of their community that isn't a typical suspect, I guess. I'm just mindful of the tendency sometimes when you go to these roundtables, it's the same group of people who probably sat on that roundtable. They all are executives, which of course that perspective is important, but in the same way that for you guys, you're let's say engaging an Indigenous institution, but kind of nudging them to engage an actual Indigenous person who's connected to their institution rather than just this ED or CEO coming in.
No, absolutely. I think that's going to be, that's going to be a baked-in sort of part of our process, I think, engaging with all of these different groups, as we do want to hear the perspectives, not just of the EDs and not just of some of the higher-ranking folks, but we do want to hear the perspectives. So it's probably going to be hey, are there two people from your organization that can come, one bringing that, ED lens and one bringing that organization perspective, and then one bringing the perspective, a bit further down in the organization or associated with the organization. Well, they'll have more, let's call it on the ground or lived experience in those buckets. The other aspect to trying to ensure that we're holistically collecting sort of those perspectives of the on-the-ground individuals as well is all of the outreach that we're going to do to these organization partners is also going to be combined with like a, you know, and I realize there might be a limited uptake here, but we're going to provide them with the consultation material as well as probably a hard copy of the survey questions to say, hey, like this can be filled out and please pass this on to your members of your organization. Obviously, that's going to be a little bit different based on what focus group we're talking about or what organization we're talking about, but really want to, you know, in true spirit of collaboration and building relationships with these organizations, we really want to see it the engagement expand just past the ED of the group and also utilize them to collect some feedback amongst their organization as well through whether it's the public consultation in the Engage Hamilton website or whether it's a hard copy of the specific discussion guide that can be circulated with other individuals.
Yeah, and I would feel really great if by the end of this exercise, when we're submitting the report, we can say that we did engage. We made it a priority to not just get the CEO to come to the table, but it's an opportunity for those leaders to bring in a junior staff from there. Anyway, I'll keep quiet, but I really would love that to be a thing.
Absolutely, completely agreed.
Madam, yeah, go ahead.
I love that, and I'll echo the importance, I think, of I don't know, we don't want to discourage the CEO or executive director, whomever, but particularly maybe in some of the bigger organizations, they may be fairly detached from the day-to-day kind of communication aspects with the city. So somehow in the invitation, framing it so it's not like a high profile opportunity for the lead of the organization to have a seat at the table for this consultation. Like, that's not it at all. They're just meeting with some regular folks who are from the enterprise or from the task force, right? So yeah, maybe we need to have some thinking offline about the wording of the invitation. I had, I think, two I think this all looks great. I like the categories and I think they capture well and have those distinctions between one another as well in a way that's very intuitive. One interesting thing, I see the word, and we've been using it now in this part of the discussion, community members, and it made me remember back to our discussion earlier on where we were talking about residents, but maybe that doesn't quite capture it. And to me, that feels like nicely inclusive, and maybe in a way that resident to me almost implies that the person is renting or owning, you know, kind of residential. So maybe that's just, to me, that was feeling like a good term that we might want to borrow and lean on in the aspects of our communication. And the last part, I know we said we would get to the list of organizations or different folks who we're going to consult with. I just wanted to reference back to, and I was going back through our minutes so that I could be precise about where it was listed. Back in the spring, we had worked on a list as the task force of different organizations and partners. And so I see that there was a draft version. I'm not sure if it ever got finalized, but it was in the April meeting package. And so I think, you know, building on that would be good. And we had in fact broken it down to a lot of kind of similar categories as it relates to healthcare, education, business, community and social services, community organizations. So maybe just that can be a resource as we're finalizing the list.
Absolutely, and just make sure it's clear. It's actually that list that informed the buckets on this one. So awesome. We have that in hand, and we're going to use that sort of same breakdown and that list of. If I'm thinking of the right document, that had a kind of the different buckets and different identified. Like there was. I think different levels of specificity in between some of like the Hamilton sports groups and then you know, Hamilton paramedics, Hamilton police service type in those buckets. So we're going to just build that out into a bit more of a collective or a bit more of a robust invite list that we can come to agreement on in the near future, and then can get invites set out. And I think the one other thing that one thing for discussion, or one thing that might lead to some more robust engagements, as well as partnering with some of the folks that we're interested in inviting to sort of co-host or co-lead some of these sessions. So thinking through, and I think I picked on this example last time, and I'm just going to unfortunately go back to the same well, but thinking about the Hamilton Chamber of Commerce as a conduit of reaching out to folks in the city, whether it's small business or some of the more institutional partners or anchor institutions that can provide their thoughts and provide their engagement. So really taking that lens across all of the different groups of, is there a community partner? Is there someone that is sort of a standout that we can have a partnership with, which might also lead to a bit more robust engagement in terms of ensuring that there's a good number of community partners at each of these sessions, but as well, Tinashe, to what you were mentioning earlier, working with these institutions, I think we also might find more success in that downstream, ensuring that there's lived experience and ensuring that there's more junior folks coming in and attending these sessions, other than just continuous engagement with the EDs, who again their perspective is great and has been valuable to the city. But I think, in the spirit of the fact that we're building off of past consultations, I know the perspectives of a lot of these organizations and a lot of the EDs and senior leadership at these organizations were included in the reports that are informing this next step. So I think it's just a natural progression that we broaden the scope here a little bit in terms of who we're talking to in each of these organizations.
Joe, anything from your side? No. Okay. Excellent. So really good conversation there, Madeline. I like your points about community members as a concept that's very holistic, and really good. Some points I had made as well. Just because it wasn't noted in the language, and I think this will be important, because if you look at this list, for example, it's almost like every type of organization in the city and every theme of everything that's happening in the city. So when we're putting this out, really pulling it back to, we have a mandate around the intersection of transparency, access, accountability, and trust. So just that framing, which I know we'll have in general, but even with our focus groups, we're here to talk to you about those themes as they pertain to your relationship with the city. Noting as well that for some of these organizations, there's different level of proximity. So some are almost, less even arm's length or extensions of the city, whereas some are, more detached, and there's different types of relationships. So just noting that, there's varying levels of that type of intersection. Really good feedback there. And yeah, and again, for all of us, I think, balancing scope, obviously we basically are saying we're going to do all this in 2 months, let's say, before we start report writing, right? So obviously we want to, we're having this conversation framed around the focus groups, which is a engagement activity, but the overarching communication to everybody is, hey, by the way, you can send us a written submission. You can, anybody come to delegate. You can, anybody fill out the survey. And then, you may fit into a focus group in particular, and making sure that everybody at the first level has said, nobody is precluded in any way from providing feedback into this process. And we decided to set up these particular channels, and with this time frame that we've given ourselves, right, to execute them all. So really good conversation, and I think we're doing a good job of fitting all the Jenga blocks in to our little box here and making sure that they fit really neat and tight. And so yeah, we did bleed into the second question a little bit as well on some of what the groups are, but I'm hearing general agreement of the categorization generally is good, and making sure that within those categories we are seeking the type of diversity and different voices, saying that word very broadly, within those groups to have at the table to make sure we're best informed. Yep.
Yeah, I just want to note, I know Madeline and the Lakeville clusters had worked a lot on this area of the stakeholder engagement, so we just want to honor that work he did contribute while he was here.
Absolutely. Thank you for making note of that, Tinashe. Yeah, well said. One last little point as well. I know SPRC in particular is making a point to be very thoughtful about in-person, online, and the dynamics of that. For the other groups, enterprise-led, do we have a perspective on online, in-person? Obviously, from a logistical perspective with a short period of time, it could be easier to facilitate online conversations, but open the floor for any.
would we consider hybrid, or does that become complicated? But I do envision if you're trying to bring together, it's always, there's something nice about focus groups having an element of in-person, because people are able to riff off of one another, I think, a little bit, in a different way anyway, with a different quality. But logistically, for anybody who doesn't have barriers to access to technology, often the virtual is going to be preferable. So, thoughts?
As a high level response, and I'm not going to give a very concrete answer here, and I'm going to apologize for that. I agree in the sense of there is some different components here to think about in terms of if I have a preference or if we have a preference of enterprise, having these in-person focus groups, I think is probably the best way to go about it. But noting time constraints, noting accessibility challenges, having a virtual or hybrid option is also equally as important. Our perspective, and welcome thoughts and feedback and direction on this. Our perspective is, as we pull together the invite list, and as we perhaps identify whether or not there's a co-host or a partnered organization for each of these groups, I think we would reach out to the co-host or the partners with a very specific and clear, this is our deadline. Like, we would love to partner with you, collaborative, we're going to work together. We will do whatever makes sense for this cohort and for us to execute the right focus group. Here's our deadline. What makes sense? Like, can we do hybrid? Can we do in person? Does it make sense for focus group? So, I kind of imagine a world in which by the time we get to the end of this, there is probably a couple that are hybrid, a couple that are virtual, and a couple that are in person, just depending on how it comes out in the wash with all the different community partners. This approach, really is just based on the fact that this is, to Mark's point, one piece of 100 pieces moving at the exact same time. So I don't want to, we don't want to presuppose or make any additional challenges to ourselves in terms of being very specific and no, we're only going to do hybrid or we're only going to do in-person events. But really, we'll just see that, we'll set the deadlines with whatever partners, or even if they're just organized by us ourselves. And then once we identify those deadlines, we'll just whatever makes the most sense to get the most amount of participation and most robust engagement across each theme, I think is where we're going to end up. But if there's specific direction from the group on what makes more sense, we're happy to have that conversation, but that's just our thinking.
Thank you. Love that. I would like to recommend hybrid engagement just to ensure that we are reducing those barriers. I feel inspired by these connections with community partners, and I'm wondering, as part of that outreach, to let them know that we want to hear from you, but also would you like to help participate in expanding this? And that would be an opportunity for those community leaders of those organizations to both sit at your table, but also be a part of this process and bring in their network, their clients, the populations that they serve. And often we can help support in ways of either providing bus tickets, honorariums to demonstrate, that we value people's expertise. And it really shows that kind of partnership and that relationship building that we really want to do. And I'm sure that that's something too that the public engagement team can help support you with as well. But I'm just thinking, as that out of the gate, kind of maybe an opportunity to say that we've got multiple opportunities. And if Jocelyn Strutt's on the line, you're welcome to jump in.
Thanks, Cindy. Hi, everyone. My name is Jocelyn Strutt. I'm a senior project manager for public engagement, and I love the conversation that's been taking place around the table, and want to congratulate everyone for getting to this point. I echo Cindy's comments around providing multiple methods or different ways for folks to be able to participate. Recognizes that there's sometimes limitations to how some people can participate versus others. So it's allowing that flexibility for different participation opportunities and the amount of participation that folks want to engage in.
Thank you, everybody. And again, I'll just be that voice and note. So like hypothetically, you do a focus group meeting. If you have only 12 people, that's and realistically, you can't have a meeting for more than say 2 hours of everybody sitting around a table, virtual or in person. That's a maximum of maybe 8 minutes airtime per person. If you fill up a room with 30 people, people aren't going to get to talk. It's really not a focus group. So I'm just going to table, like, we do want this breadth of participation, diversity of voices, but like in terms of even having a productive focus group, there is some kind of conceptual constraints on how many people would just have airtime in them. Also, obviously, if we're doing hybrid meetings, we need well-equipped, accessible venues that enable not only accessibility of a venue, but also a robust, like this room, for example, like a robust conversation that has great streaming and seating and visible sight lines and all that type of stuff. So I'll just put those points on the table as we do the mathematics and Jenga around fitting this all in the next 6 weeks.
Just building on that, if you're in a location that is not hardwired for a hybrid meeting, it becomes, the production becomes quite complex. So you probably are already aware of that, but this might not be something that's super amenable to just like setting up shop in a rec center or something like that.
Without a doubt, and I think like Cindy completely take the point, and I think like that is the perfect scenario, is doing these hybrids so that there's that one opportunity for everyone to sort of participate and engage. But then also echoing Mark's point as well is just trying to make sure that we can actually have a robust conversation, get to some recommendations throughout these different groups, and then noting also just the location and time challenges. I think best foot forward is attempting hybrid opportunities across the board, but then really we'll just, and whether it's in concert with the city and city staff, or whether it's working with our institutional partner or potential partners for these different focus groups, there's going to be a lot of logistics to be juggled over the course of the next 6 weeks.
I just want to jump in and say sometimes when we're referring to hybrid, we're not necessarily meaning all happening at the exact same time, which is actually happening right now. No, meaning have an opportunity for an in-person, it might be in the evening, and having a virtual option at another time. It is tricky to do both at the exact same time. I'm not actually recommending that technologically. Thank you. Unless Lorraine wants to come with us wherever we go.
And all her equipment. Right. Yeah. Okay, excellent. So we've covered a lot of ground there, a lot of considerations to have in mind. Any further thoughts, comments on this topic, the focus groups, or any other of our discussion items? Craig.
I'll just throw out one more. Greg Tedesco, Senior Project Manager, Community Engagement. Obviously, there's a big push to getting everything online and operational, and we're talking about even the media release, things like that. I think one thing that we can also support with is promotional. So like when this is live, actually having people know that it's live without just having to go to the website off chance. So we do have an internal team that can look at opportunities for, whether it's, paid online promotion or running something in the Spectator or something like that, that can, drive people to the survey site, things like that. But just wanted to throw that out there too. There is, obviously, as we've discussed throughout this, the task force does have a budget associated with it for promotional as a part of that overall approach. So that's something that we can also support with, so that when it is there, it's trying to get to as many audiences as possible in various ways too. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thanks, Greg. And we actually, although we're finalizing some of the elements, we generally know what we're going to be promoting. So maybe that's a conversation we can start right away, just to have a little bit of a basically comms plan around getting the word out. Excellent. All right, any final thoughts, comments? Okay, a lot to do. So on that note, we weren't putting forward any formal activities for approval, but we covered a lot of ground in terms of discussion. So I will ask for a mover and seconder to receive all of the items that were presented during our discussion. Moved by Joanne, seconded by Tinashe. All in favor? Okay, motion carried to receive those items. So thank you, everybody. Very robust conversation. Before we wrap up today's meeting, are there any other elements of other business? Okay, seeing none, I will ask for a mover and seconder to adjourn. Moved by Joanne. Joanne, really fast, moved to adjourn. Seconded by Tinashe. All in favor? Okay, motion carried. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Good job.